Señoras y señores, se encuentra con nosotros el ciudadano presidente de los Estados Unidos mexicanos.
Este sí funciona. Rethinking the micro.
Rethink Provoking Voice. Gracias, señor presidente. Señoras y señores, señor presidente de los Estados Unidos mexicanos, distinguidas personalidades, el momento esperado de Rethinking G20. Grandes líderes del mundo, que el tema toral que van a tratar el día de hoy, liderado por el señor presidente de México, es hacia dónde debe ir el G20, el futuro, los grandes temas, las grandes omisiones y, por supuesto, importantes propuestas. Le pedimos a todos ustedes un fuerte aplauso para este distinguido panel. Gracias.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. I hope you are having a great time here in Los Cabos. Welcome everybody. Para México es un honor recibirlos a todos ustedes y particularmente recibir a tan distinguidas personalidades. Y me alegra que este seminario, este encuentro, sea innovativo, sea innovador, sea original. Felicidades a los organizadores, al secretario de Hacienda. Y sin ir más lejos, déjenme empezar muy rápidamente con Bob Zoellick. Como ustedes saben, Bob Zoellick es una personalidad, ha estado en el gobierno de los Estados Unidos en temas económico-comerciales, está ahora como director del Banco Mundial en tiempos muy difíciles. Así que, doctor Zoellick, si usted tuviera la posibilidad de tomar todas las decisiones, assuming that you are able to take all the decisions that we need to take, and you were the leader of the G20, what will be those decisions? What exactly the world must to do in the coming days, and what will be those decisions if you were able to take them? So call the facts, Mr. Zoellick, and tell us what exactly you as G20 will do.
Well, first, Mr. President, let me compliment you not only for your service and leadership in Mexico, but also for what you've done on the international scene. We worked together in Cancun with a very successful meeting on global climate change, and so I think it's very appropriate as you close out your term that you're also trying to do this on the international economic stage. I think when one thinks about the G20, there's the high politics, but there's also an agenda that's quite important that often doesn't get the news. So the way you phrase the question about if I could determine what would be done, I would like to see a position come out of Europe that helps give people confidence that the combination of issues that they have to deal with, banking, sovereign debt, competitiveness, has a pathway to resolution. I wouldn't expect that all the details could be worked out, but I think that 4 years into this economic downturn, you can feel the political tensions building. And it's very important, not only for Europeans, but for the whole global economy, that we're able to set a direction on this. I frankly think that's going to be a little difficult because we've got events going on in Europe right now, And I think the process that's been followed so far has been one that has been incremental. And as you know, much politics is often incremental. But sometimes there's days in the course of human events where political leaders have to move a step beyond. And I think we're fast moving to that one. But second, I would say there's another important aspect of the G20 that it's important not to lose sight of, and that is there's often an agenda of important topics that aren't necessarily front-page news, but can be very important in terms of lives and costs. I just attended one with Secretary Meade about resilience to natural disasters. Mexico's seen natural disasters, earthquakes, floods. And this can involve millions of lives. It can involve $1 trillion that it's important to try to learn how to try it from other countries about how to try to minimize these costs, to prepare, to build resilience. Financial inclusion is another topic that Mexico is pushing this year, and there's still billions of people that are excluded from financial markets. Environment and development topics heading to the Rio meeting. And then building on some of the ones that were done by Korea and France and Canada, dealing with food security and dealing with infrastructure. So these are very important to the international system. But ultimately, I think the effectiveness of the G20 will be judged by its performance on some of these high-profile issues. And I think those are very much a work in progress.
Thank you. Well, but if you were able to change the mechanism, the G20, as a summit, as a work, as a group, what exactly would you suggest us?
Well, I think the G20 is still going through its own period of testing. As many people know, since the late 70s, mid-70s, there was a group called the G7 and then the G8 that often represented the trilateral community of Japan, the U.S. and Canada, and some of the European countries. But the G20, which had existed at the level of finance ministers for a decade, was really propelled by this crisis to a summit level. And it has the advantage of having more of the key economic players at the table. It has the disadvantage of being bigger, and it's always harder in bigger groups to get things done. So my own sense is that to be effective, one will need to see countries get together behind the scenes to develop initiatives and ideas. It's frankly better if they're developed and developing. It's better if they cut across different regions, but there's different ways to do this. I saw that Korea and Australia were sending a common message coming into this summit. That's very important. Because I think, as you know, it's hard to act at 20 or there's even more countries sitting around the table. So this is now in the realm of economic diplomacy. And I think it will be a challenge for some of the key nation states, which are still the drivers of policy, to figure out how they can use initiatives in concert with others to try to send a larger international message. This was actually done at the G7 level in the late 80s at another period, but it's somewhat waned in terms of practice today. Now, there's another view that says we need to build more superstructure around this. I personally am more wary of that. I think building secretariats and staffs would add to bureaucratization, and you'd lose what is the key aspect, which is trying to get heads of government together, or before that their finance ministers, to really come to grips with some of these key decisions. So I tend to view the fact that at the end of the day, it's still the nation states that will have to make the key decisions. But the G20 or the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the regional development banks can be a thin tissue that can interconnect those sovereign states, help prod them, help come up with ideas, help with execution, and you want to avoid the bureaucracy in the process. But I also think that one of the challenges will be for these countries to see that as important as their politics is at the national level, that the economy is one that is global, and how to try to maneuver their national policies in a way that create a larger common good internationally. This can be topics like trade, or it can be topics like environment, And today it's clearly problems of the debt and recovery from an ongoing global crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Salik. It's an honor for Mexico to have here one of the most important women in the world now leading the Health World Organizations, Madam Margaret Chan. Let me ask you, Mrs. Chan, it looks like a very complex time to think about health in the middle of this economic crisis. But listening to you yesterday, I listened to very important arguments regarding health and its impact. Is there any sense to think and to talk about health systems, to talk about health itself in these terrible problems we are facing in economic terms? Is there any space for health in this environment? Margaret Chan, please.
Mr. President, first and foremost, let me thank you for the invitation to this truly, truly impressive seminar. I was here since this morning. I was taken by surprise at each and every presentation. The collection of people that the organizer brought together, the new ideas, the creativity, the honest discussion is extremely, extremely useful. Now, let me now turn to the very important question you make. If we truly believe in the importance of inclusive development, we must put a human face to it. Putting a human face to it is important, but understanding the relationship between health and wealth is all the more reinforcing the whole discussion about economic growth. If you don't have healthy workforce, healthy population, who would want to invest in your country? Because the sickness absence will increase the cost of operation. No business people would invest. And actually, the business leaders are much more ahead of the curve than most governments in terms of realizing the importance of health. Without health, you cannot really have the people to support the economic development. So the economic argument is strong. The political and the moral argument is equally strong. When I look at the countries around, countries that are doing well are actually countries that provide universal health coverage to people. That is context specific, good for the country. And I'm happy to be in Mexico, sir. Let me do a commercial. I've been following your presidency, and it is amazing to see very few presidents and these days that walk their talk. You gave your promise to the Mexicans that you will, in your term, introduce universal health coverage so that no woman, children living in villages would be denied access to care because they are poor, because they are women. The Seguro Popular you have done in 6 years, more than this country has achieved in 100 years. So I want to please join me in commending
Thank you,
Mr. President, let me through you convey a very important message to the G20 leaders. Investing in human capital through investing in health will bring you return on investment that you will never regret. Never forget the people.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chan. Thank you for your words and congratulations for your work leading this very important health organization. Your leadership is remarkable and it's doing a different era in this important issue. I agree with you. Another topic that the G20 is addressing these days is financial inclusion. I'm probably one of the most important leaders in the last decades, not only talking but also doing about financial inclusion, is Mr. Yunus. Thank you for coming to Mexico. As you know, Mr. Yunus, the Mexican president included in the agenda of the G20 financial inclusion. And let me be honest, a lot of people are very skeptical about this issue. what could provide to these economic problems we are facing the financial inclusion, and in particular, why is so important financial inclusion of the poorest people to the economic agenda these days? Please, Mr. Yunus.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for asking this particular question. We have been discussing this for a long time now, and you have been coming forward to implement the microfinance in Mexico, so we are familiar with that. When I work with the poor women, repeatedly one question people ask me, why poverty? What is the reason that poverty is in this world? And I've tried to answer that question in my way, and seeing what the poor people are, seeing the difference it makes in their life, the access to simple financial service, suddenly they can take charge of their own life and start creating their own income. You see the difference that it makes in their life. And the answer that you always get from seeing that, poverty is not created by the poor people. It's not their fault. Poverty is created by something else, somewhere else. It's not self-inflicted condition. It is imposed condition. Poverty is imposed by outside conditionalities. And what is it? One can easily say it's created by the system that we have created around us. And one of those, part of that system is the institution. Banking institution that we created over the past doesn't open their door to the poor people. So they have no opportunity to have a little money in their hands so that they can use their talent, their creativity to create a life for themselves. So that's where the microcredit and this inclusion, financial inclusion becomes so important, because it gives them the first chance to use their own talent, own creativity to make a difference. Because the world has been created, the institution has been created so that they have to live on charity. Charity is no solution for poverty. Charity can help them for a while, but it doesn't help the people to bring out their own talent and creativity. That's why this inclusion is important. And quickly I should mention, not only the institutions we created is wrong, also the very conceptual framework that we created is also wrong. And that's what creates poverty. Because the institutional or the conceptual framework that we created is a money-centric framework. Everything is about money. Make money, make money. Money is the king. And money is the habit, is almost becomes an addiction. The institutional, the conceptual framework interprets human being in a wrong way. Human beings are not robots, money-making robots. But that's the way the framework interprets you. I said, we are human beings. We are not robots. We are not one-dimensional beings. So that change has to come. When the G20 works with the many issues, but we also address the basic framework issue. Unless we correct the framework, we'll go to the same routine, doing the same thing over and over again. And we cannot get rid of poverty, we cannot get rid of health issues that Margaret Chan just mentioned, and we cannot get rid of the environmental issues, the food crisis and all of that. These are because the fundamental flaw in the very structure of it. So we have to address that. So this is where I think G20 can play a very important role, looking for a framework which will not lead to this kind of situation. We can create a framework where we can say there should not be any unemployment at all. Why should there be the unemployment? Is the unemployed person created unemployment? No, he is not, or she is not responsible for that. Then who imposed that unemployment on that person? It's a system which imposed that condition on that. So why are we kind of singing glory of that framework which imposes such hardships on billions of people, not just millions, in poverty, in unemployment, and so on. So how do we do the redesigning? That's I think, an important issue for G20 to look at.
Thank you. And there was where financial inclusion plays a key role fighting poverty.
Very important role. And G20 not only will be political institution, should be focusing on social issues. Most often in the discussions, at least as reported in the newspapers, it's all about political issues. So I would hope that G20 would be looking at the futuristic issues and also on the social side of issues. Like you have the G20, you have the B20. I think also that can also include young people's 20. The young people should get together too to make it happen so that they can discuss all the... Because the young people are the ones who will create the future. But somehow they are not included in the whole debate and discussion because they will be the one who will provide the leadership. They will change the world. This world will be completely different in 20, 25 years than today. So we should be looking at that world that is emerging. And they are, the young people are the one who will take us there.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yunus. Mr. Yunus mentioned poverty and all those social aspects that Madame Chan mentioned as well. And probably the most serious problem we have is extreme poverty, misery. In the last couple of years, 3 years, we have seen in the world, and in particular in the north of Africa, radical change in terms of political regimes and social turmoils, and in particular, a terrible problem regarding harvest in the Horn of Africa. My perception is, my personal opinion is, the social turmoils in the north of Africa and all those change of regimes, a lot of people say that were provoked by Twitter and Facebook and others, and probably social nets played a very important role in the communication of the phenomenon. But in my perception, the people jumped on the streets, mainly because the price of wheat and the price of bread went up almost more than twice in the 6 months previous to those social turmoil. So there is a problem with the price of food, and there is a crucial issue of food security because the price of food is increasing, and if we consider that more than 1 billion people are living under the line of poverty or extreme poverty, if those prices probably living with $1 or 1.50 or 1.20 dollars a day, if the price of food increase, extreme poverty increase as well. Probably the most important continent facing the problem of extreme poverty is Africa. And we have the pleasure to have today with us the President of the African Development Bank, Mr. Donald Kaberuka. And I wonder if it is possible to share with us, Mr. Kaberuka, your vision about the problems of Africa, but not only Africa, the problems of poverty and the problem of food security that we are trying to address now in the G20 summit here in Mexico. Mr. Kaberuka, please.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Let me first of all thank you for inviting me and through me the African people to the summit. I think that it shows the friendship between the people of this continent and Africa as well. We have a lot to learn from you and from Latin American friends. What you have done here in Mexico and Pendula in Brazil on safety nets is truly very, very impressive. And I should join Margaret in commending you for that. President, maybe I will disappoint you a bit. Because for far too long, Africa has been viewed from that particular angle of problems, of hunger, of poverty. And I can't blame those who see Africa through that particular prism. But over the last 10, 15 years, something has happened on the continent of Africa, which I think is irreversible. Today it is one of the fastest growing continents on the planet. There are a few outlying difficult areas, including the ones you mentioned, but a third of the African countries today are growing at double-digit numbers. Another dozen or so are growing between 7 and 10%. Even during the financial crisis, there was a temporary drop, but quickly we picked up. So things are happening on the continent. But these are the two problems you mentioned, and you're right. One of them is that, like Latin America, we have to ensure that that growth benefits the largest number of people. There's an issue of inclusive growth. And North Africa, you mentioned, was growing at about 5.5% for the previous decade, including Tunisia, where I live. But there were issues of political and economic exclusion, which combined to give the explosion which you found. Now, in the Horn of Africa, we have to be extremely careful. Bob knows the Horn very well. There are issues to do with climate change. There are geostrategic issues there. It was a place where the Cold War was fought for almost a decade in the 1970s, and that has left the scars in places like Somalia. Now, we're trying to resolve those legacy issues in the context of the new crisis in the world. But when it comes to food security, I think the solution to food security in the long term has to be through economic growth, trade, and investment. I think the politics of food aid is over, except for emergency situation. This is why I commend investment and growth was at the center of how to resolve food security. But that is not enough. I think that has to go with what Bob has been advocating for a long time, effective, targeted safety nets for people who might not benefit immediately from the benefits of economic growth. So I hope in the G20 in the coming years, G20 does not make the same mistake G8 was making of looking at Africa as a place for pity, a place to be helped when there is some particular agenda internationally. No. We think it is time to work with us to unlock the potential of Africa. When you have those millions of African kids getting out of poverty, they buy iPhones, they buy iPads, their fathers buy bicycles. I know an American company which is going to invest in large agricultural equipment in Africa. That is the way to resolve issues of poverty. That is the way to resolve issues of food security and to ensure that Africa joins the rest of the world in this momentum. Can I end saying this, Mr. President, that one of the beauties of the G20 is that it has shown that there's no single one model of development. There is everything to learn from the whole array of countries in this grouping. From your own country, from Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey. Some have grown through laissez-faire capitalism, it has worked for them. Others have succeeded through welfare capitalism, it has worked for them. Others have succeeded through state-led capitalism, it has worked for them. Others have muddled through. And I think that learning lessons inside the G20 for me is extremely important. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Quite interesting point of view about reality there in Africa and this contrast between countries growing really fast right now and this extreme poverty with starving and living today in the Horn. But and the key, as you were saying, is economic growth, trade, investment, and we need to face those challenges. Other point which is crucial for G20 and the world right now is institutional framework. Something is happening, something is growing when you have not the right institutional framework. And one of the most assertive and right specialists on that is precisely Mr. Kutter. Mr. Kutter, Robert Kutter is professor of law at the University of California. He's a specialist in a quite interesting relationship between law and economy, in which I do believe. Mr. Kutter, what exactly we need to do in terms of institutional framework? What is failing? What is functioning? And what could be your suggestions to the G20 regarding this relationship between law and economy? If you were able to fix the problems of the world, from your perspective, what could you suggest to this group and to the G20 leaders? Mr. Kutter.
Before I answer you, I want to pay you a compliment. 17 years ago, I came to Mexico City for the first founding meeting of the Latin American Law and Economics Association. Law and economics is my field. And the opening speaker at that meeting was former President de la Madrid. And I'm so pleased to be here and see the continuing intellectual caliber and commitment of the Mexican political leadership. I can tell you, I congratulate you for choosing such leaders, and I can tell you it's not always so. Now, in 1776, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, which changed economic thought because he taught that the wealth of a nation did not consist in the gold in vaults, but in the productive power of its people. And I think that is right, but it needs to be updated a little bit. It needs to be updated a little bit in light of exactly what we've seen all today that Dr. Chan commented on. And that is, I think the wealth of a nation consists in the creativity of its people. 2% growth rate combined over a century, compounded over a century, gives you a six-fold increase, a little more. 10% increase, which is what China has grown at since 1980 approximately, gives you a 14,000-fold increase. Creativity can cause a growth rate that is unimaginable if we can harness it. Now, economic creativity has a special characteristic, and that is economic creativity combines a new idea with capital, with money. And this is really tricky. I can give you an actual example to show why. I had a friend who worked in a Boston investment bank, and one day he received a letter which simply said, "I know how your bank can make $5 million, and for $2 million I'll tell you." That's the problem. The problem is if he actually knows and he tells them, why should they pay him anything? And certainly they shouldn't pay him anything unless they know what the idea is and what its worth is. This is the problem of the combining of new ideas with capital. I call it the double trust dilemma. The capitalist has to trust that the entrepreneur will not steal the idea, and the entrepreneur has to trust that the capitalist has to trust that the entrepreneur will not steal his money, and the entrepreneur has to trust that the capitalist will not take his idea. This is very difficult to solve. And it turns out that the solution is deeply legal. In my opinion, the secret of Silicon Valley, which I study a lot, is not just the proximity of Berkeley and Stanford University, it's especially the legal infrastructure. The legal infrastructure in Berkeley, in Silicon Valley that enable that fluorescence is impossible in most of the world. Take a simple point. In Germany, you can't take stock as payment for your legal services. You can't be an investment, you can't be a venture capitalist and a lawyer. This is a problem that was solved in the evolution of the new institution of venture capital. Now, I'd like to talk a lot about this, but I'm going to stop. And what I do want to say is this. I have talked a lot about how you combine a new idea with capital in a book called Solomon's Knot. And Solomon's Knot refers to a kind of knot that ties two rings together real strong. If you go to the harbor at Cabo, you'll see it on boats. And if you look at Roman tiles in Pompeii, you'll see it in the borders. And the image is that of the way the law enables you to unite capital and new ideas.
Very good. Thank you, Professor. So to connect creativity and capital, that's the key issue. And probably the legal framework is key for that.
So I say we can all see the material infrastructure, but the immaterial infrastructure, which is especially the law, is every bit as important. It's also difficult because it's political.
I agree with that. Well, thank you. Well, a lot of questions, and probably this is a very wide agenda. I will say a very comprehensive agenda for G20, from health problems towards financial inclusions, economic growth, financial stability. But one of the people who is working day after day on a daily basis, dealing with real and pragmatic problems, in this case in our region of Latin America, is Dr. Luis Alberto Moreno, Director of Inter-American Development Bank. I wonder if you can share with us, Dr. Moreno, your views about G20, and what could be your suggestions about G20? What is the change we need in the G20? What is the change we need in the world? And this is an open question for all of you. What exactly we, as leaders of G20, we must do in order to innovate, in order to create new outcomes, new results, positive and pragmatic results for the people we are representing? Please, Mr. Moreno.
Well, President Calderon, let me begin by saying and complimenting you the way my predecessors have complimented you in your leadership, not only in front of the government of Mexico, but what you've attempted to do in the G20. This is the first time that the G20 meets in an emerging country. And what you've done here, to begin to put a set of questions, I think come back to the central idea of what the G20 is. And the G20, in essence, is the coming together of two worlds, of the developed world, which today is close to 50% of world output, and the emerging world, which soon will be not only getting to that 50%, but surpassing it. And as a result, everything that the G20 does, I think is important to begin to see from the perspective of Latin America, and where, with your leadership, not only what you were able to do in COP16, but in basically inserting Latin America into the larger discussion of the global issues. Because we're basically beginning to be able to punch above our weight. And I say that because the size of Latin American output today is about 9% of the world economy, and we're contributing about 12% of its growth. What are the issues as a result? Many of the issues that we have talked about here, but they center, of course, in our case, in the case of Latin America, what does it mean? The bank recently did a study that showed 9 countries in the last 35 years who were able to become developed countries. One of them was Greece. One of them was South Korea. I say this because we are in a situation, as we saw recently in the United States, incomes of the middle class dropping in the developed world, and incomes in emerging countries and middle classes beginning to grow, and grow significantly. And this means, of course, that as we look forward, it's very critical to, from the perspective of the G20, to help us think through how do we get out of the natural resource curse that we have, but it's a curse and an opportunity. How can we develop, based on high commodity prices, which are probably going to be there for some time? We know that they're going to be more volatile in minerals, less so in food, some of the things that have been talked before. But the reality is, how do we construct that economy of the future? And here, the professor was saying it's about legal issues. I say it's about an ecosystem. How do we build that ecosystem that permits entrepreneurship and the knowledge economy, and for, in the case of Latin America, we seize upon that. And I think these are the central issues that, as Bob correctly said, are somehow under the headlines. Because I think at the end of the day, it is about concentrating for the G20 and for the perspective of the G20, how to solidify the trend lines going forward. And for that is the work on issues of technology, on issues of human capital, on financial inclusion, and some of the innovative ways to deal and be able to do inclusive growth. And I think these are, for Latin America, certainly the question of productivity is perhaps at the center. And things like you have been able to do in this country, which I really commend you in terms of the huge investments in infrastructure. When you compare around Latin America, few countries have been able to advance in infrastructure investment the way you have. And I think the big challenge that we have all in front of us is more in the area, what do we do with labor markets, what do we do with technology?
Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Yo creo que ha quedado muy claro cómo los más distinguidos especialistas del mundo en su área, en salud, en finanzas, en inclusión financiera, en desarrollo, en, como ha dicho el profesor Kutter, en infraestructura legal, no solo material, han dicho. Pero yo quiero insistir en mi pregunta, si podemos ser un poquito francos y por favor intervengan en el momento que quieran, interrúmpanse un poquito, en fin. ¿Qué está funcionando y qué no está funcionando del G20? Por un lado. Y por otro, ¿cuál puede ser un buen resultado del G20 en Los Cabos? ¿Qué podemos esperar? ¿Y cuál puede ser un mal resultado del G20 en Los Cabos? So what could be a good outcome of this G20 summit and what could be a bad outcome of this G20? What could be the best expectation about this? And what is working in the G20 and what is not working in the G20? Please, anybody. Madam Chan.
I'd like to say something which is perhaps politically incorrect.
All right. I
but
like it
which
so
is
much.
important. Let me first and foremost to share with you what I've been hearing from leaders of the world, which I had the opportunity to meet during my travels in very important meetings like Davos and so on and so forth. The political cycle of leaders in G20 in all their countries is short. The longest is already in Mexico, 6 years, but you should get second term. Now, all the issues that we are dealing with, improving the growth, the economic situation, food security, climate change, energy for all, have a much longer horizon. Now, the continuity is extremely important. Now, we understand the political systems need to have, changes, but whether or not you can put in place in the G20 to track your visions, progress on what you have promised, to give the credibility and the legitimacy to the G20. Now, some developing countries and small countries are saying that, should we allow 20 countries to make a decision on important global solutions? And I agree with Bob. You have to strike a balance between legitimacy and efficiency. 20 leaders is already difficult to make decisions. Any bigger than that is almost impossible. And that's also the challenge for multilateralism, including the UN organizations. Now, whether or not there can be something to provide the continuity, the legitimacy, without being too bureaucratic and heavy, we could have nimble mechanism to show people the G20 leaders really turn things around. You have done it, with the 2008 crisis. And going forward, what are some of the things that the group of G20 can do with the other countries? And Bob has a point. I don't know whether I read Bob's comment correctly. Whether or not you should also use the multilateral organizations, like, for example, FAO, World Food Program, IFAD, in the Rome-based institutions to legitimize, to get broad-based support from the, food insecurity issue. Health is not prominent in G20, but I hope that, you would pay attention to this important social pillar along with education. And the importance of education is because if you don't have good people, educated people, you will lose out in this knowledge economy of 21st century. So, Mr. President, politically incorrect, but it's important that you hear it.
You're absolutely right with that. Es una pregunta muy importante que hace la doctora Chan. Son tantos los intereses políticos y se acortan tanto los mandatos. Déjenme decirles que yo llevo varios G20, no me acuerdo cuántos, y ya voy resultando como de los veteranos del G20. Creo que el señor presidente de China, Hu Jintao, es bueno, el rey de Arabia, desde luego, el presidente de China, probablemente otro más, son más los veteranos en eso, pero luego sigo yo, y he visto muchos presidentes, he visto ya, bueno, 2 presidentes de Estados Unidos, 2 presidentes de España, 2 de Francia, en fin. Y es cierto, ¿cómo darle continuidad a lo que hacemos o a lo que acordamos en el G20? Eso es cierto. ¿Cómo proveerle continuidad? Están los organismos internacionales, pero por ejemplo alguien que ha sido muy destacado en el G20, Bob Selig, también será su último G20, probablemente como director del Banco Mundial. ¿Cómo podemos darle continuidad al G20? No sé si alguno de ustedes nos pueda dar una sugerencia interesante. Y cómo suelen ocurrir las cosas, uno acuerda grandes cosas, decide grandes cosas, y si no le damos seguimiento, pues 2 años después o 1 año después viene otro G20 y volvemos a discutir los mismos temas. ¿Alguno tiene una sugerencia?
I was not focusing right on the continuity part, but another dimension which I discussed earlier with you about widening the participation in G20. The G20 represents the top 20 economies of the world. When all these top 20 countries and the economies get together, I'm sure they will come up with lots of ideas for the global implication. But something will be missing in this G20 because the poor countries are not represented here. Our suggestion is, why don't we expand G20 to G25 so that you can bring the poor economies or poor countries around the world, each one from each continent, to participate in this table. Because it's important, if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. If you're out of mind, you're out of policy. So you forget that those people exist. So it will be good to have them on the around the table when you are talking about the global issues, and that will be very important, what happens to those countries. So I think this is a very important addition to make, so that the global representation is included within the G20 itself. It doesn't become a club, all the fortunate countries. It should be a global kind of entity. And the second part, I would like to see that it becomes an important part of G20 or G25, but the visioning for future. It's not just talking about the current problems. All the time we go to the routine discussion in a diplomatic way about the current problems and what needs to be done, which is important. But we miss out that we need to build the future. And the world is changing so fast that this future will become present today right away. So, and then with the technology that has become available today, and it is kind of moving in an exponential way, and what is impossible today, it becomes possible tomorrow. So the distance between the possible and impossible is shrinking. So this is an opportunity. Why don't we make bold decision about 25 years from today and make that beginning today? Unless we see that for 25 years from now, we'll never get there because we are all stuck with the current situation. We are not looking at what it is. Inspire the world rather than continue to bring the gloom and doom of the present day and kind of walk away as if nothing is happening. Something positive can happen. World can change dramatically if our mind visions those things. Unless we vision, it will never happen. So I think visioning will be a very important part of G20.
Gracias, Mr. Yunus. Es cierto, incluir a los países más pobres en la mesa, por lo menos en la toma de decisiones, y también tener visión de largo plazo. Es muy importante para mí decirles que queremos escapar de la coyuntura, de la current situation, como dice el señor Yunus. Es decir, no todo es Grecia y no todo es el problema de Europa, hay muchas cosas que discutir. El G20 ahora se ha propuesto sí discutir de Grecia y sí discutir de España, lo haremos, pero también queremos hacer una agenda de largo plazo. Lo que estamos discutiendo ahora a nivel Sherpas, y espero discutirlo el lunes y el martes, es una agenda de largo plazo incluyente, como estamos hablando ahora, una agenda que hable de crecimiento, que hable de empleo, de inclusión financiera, de seguridad alimentaria, de instituciones financieras internacionales y sobre todo de crecimiento verde, un tema que se abordó, estoy seguro, no pude estar, pero estuvieron aquí los más brillantes exponentes del mundo en materia de crecimiento verde, Nicholas Stern, el doctor Pachauri, en fin. ¿Qué más podemos hacer en el G20 para darle este seguimiento y para tener esta visión de largo plazo que sugiere el señor Yunus? Mr. Selig.
Well, three thoughts. First, building on a point that Margaret made. One way to ensure you've got follow-up and prodding, but also make sure that all countries feel that they're involved, is to interconnect with the existing multilateral institutions. So I'm the chief executive officer of a G188 because I have 188 shareholders. And so when we work with the G20, that involves all of them. Mm-hmm. If you create something that is too much of a superstructure just for a G20 or G25 or something like that, you're going to make it harder for those that have left out. Because in my experience is, if people are part of the group, they think that's exactly the right size. And if they're not part of the group, they think it should be expanded to include theirs.
Yeah.
In addition, though, I think that there's a practical sense. You have these institutions. Why not use them? Why not modernize them? Why not have them undertake some of the challenges that you're talking about,
exactly.
Whether they be the UN institutions or the regional development banks and others as part of the process. Second observation, if you listen to the discussion of this group, it's quite interesting. The focus is actually on the topic that is not the one that you get in the daily press. It's focused on what economists would call the microeconomic or the structural agenda. How do you invest in future potential growth, whether it be human capital, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be the agricultural policies, whether it be the legal system. And what I found interesting to watch is that in this financial crisis, in part because I think developing countries went through it in the 90s, they from the start realized that they needed to strengthen future potential growth, not just deal with the budgetary and fiscal and monetary policies.
Yes.
And I think there's actually a lesson there for the developed countries that they also need structural reforms, whether it be education, innovation, other aspects. And so I think it's a good idea that you keep pushing that in the G20 and that the G20 pushes those issues and people learn from the experience, which now is no longer north-south, but increasingly south-south or south-north. But the last point is, to get to the long term, we have to get through the short term. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that we're at a very dangerous moment in the world economy. And there have been other periods like this, and if people don't come to the fundamental decisions first at a national level, but work it out internationally, very bad things can happen. And so, with all respect, I do think that some of the concerns out of Europe are going to have to be addressed. The U.S. is also a very major economy. They're not quite as precipitous, but they're looming over the horizon. And so I do think that one of the ways in which the G20 will be evaluated, because ultimately these are the leaders of these countries, is are they willing to get to work, to fix their core problems at home, and do it in a way that frankly is in concert as opposed to in opposition with one another. And we're not there yet.
Unfortunately. Luis Alberto.
Sí, presidente, yo creo que algo de este proceso de consultas lo empezó a hacer justamente México en su presidencia del G20. Nosotros en la asamblea del BID y con el liderazgo del ministro BID hicimos todo un proceso de consultas previo con un conjunto de reuniones para tratar de hacer justamente que los países que no hacían parte del G20 se sintieran incluidos. Y creo que aquí hay un tema de geometría variable, un poco lo que mencionaba Bob, de tal manera que hay instancias que se pueden ir conectando a los grandes temas de la agenda de futuro. Y hay diferentes tipos de instituciones, las instituciones regionales o casos como las instituciones globales que pueden apoyarse y que este se vuelve un principio de organización para integrar muchos de estos procesos. Lo otro, hay una serie de cosas que han salido, usted fue uno de los líderes en eso, cuál era la de fortalecer justamente las instituciones financieras internacionales de cara a un mundo en que hay un inmenso desapalancamiento en los gobiernos, en los hogares y en las empresas las necesidades de financiamiento para las grandes reformas estructurales que le quedan sobre todo a los países emergentes son fundamentales, y de allí que un poco lo que usted ha venido liderando es fundamental, y es tener un mayor capital en las instituciones multilaterales para atender justamente muchos de estos mandatos, porque de lo contrario va a ser muy difícil hacerlo, y sobre todo incorporar el nivel de conocimiento que este tipo de instituciones, a pesar de todas sus dificultades, sin duda son las que lo tienen.
Gracias. Profesor Kutter.
Thank you. In order to be creative, you need to be free. And for me, a very important phrase for growth is legalized freedom. Because freedom is not the absence of law, it's the presence of good law. Anarchy is not freedom. You need a good legal structure, but you need a legal structure that frees your creativity. And I think that the world has been stuck on stale ideological debates between left and right about the role of freedom in the economy. I think we need to adopt affirmatively and positively the position that economic freedom is a human right, and it's something that's enormously useful because of its connection to economic creativity. Aspects of the legalization of freedom on which we can agree.
Legalizar la libertad. Estoy totalmente de acuerdo. Muy bien.
Mr. President, I think the world in which we live in now basically requires three things, I think. It requires leadership, which is very strong. I think the G20 has that leadership. It showed it in London, later when they did the multilateral banks. But beyond leadership, it also requires legitimacy. And I think we should figure out how to give G20 greater legitimacy. It does not mean expanding G20 to G50, but it means probably having a more inclusive agenda, having more inclusive solutions. When we look, for example, at Basel III, what it means for low-income countries in terms of accessing finance, it was a solution, but not an inclusive one. A third thing, some of these things will have to be long-term. I think I did mention these models in the G20. How do we get Latin America and Africa to expand their trade? I've been looking at the numbers of sale of Embraer jets in the continent of Africa. It's incredible. I think we need to figure out how to generate these additional poles of growth between Latin America and Africa, between Asia and Africa, and I think you are well positioned to lead that thinking. Because like now, where will growth come from? Bob keeps asking that. But growth can come from expanded trade between some of these new continents which are coming along. So I think we should accept that some of the problems will take long to resolve, but there are some low-hanging fruits which we can tackle already. And I think one of them is to figure out how, in the absence of a global trade deal, how to expand trade opportunities between emerging markets and continents like my own.
Muchas gracias. Gracias. Un punto, ya estamos por terminar ahora el panel, y como ha dicho bien el doctor Caberuca, una de las cosas que tenemos que hacer es cómo agilizar el comercio entre nuestros países, particularmente, como él decía, entre América Latina y África, pero en general tenemos que entender, siguiendo un poco la idea de recordar la importancia de la libertad económica y de alguna manera darle un marco legal a la libertad económica, el comercio libre tiene que ver con esa libertad. Y el marco institucional, el marco legal de comercio libre tiene que ver con tratados de libre comercio, tiene que ver con la Organización Mundial de Comercio, tiene que ver con que los líderes sepamos hacer comercio legal con toda libertad y con todas sus oportunidades. Creo que esa es una de las soluciones que tienen que darse en el G20, porque contrario a esto, lo que hemos venido haciendo los líderes es cerrarle las puertas al comercio y a la libertad, y eso ha obstaculizado aún más el crecimiento. Yo quisiera concluir este panel, pero no puedo dejar de preguntar una cosa muy importante porque me he quedado con la duda de lo que ha dicho el señor Selig. Los líderes del mundo, el mundo está esperando que los líderes le demos una solución a los problemas que tenemos, porque corremos el riesgo de que las cosas se pongan muy, muy mal. Desgraciadamente, tiene razón. La pregunta que hago finalmente a cualquiera de los panelistas es, hablando de los problemas más sensibles que tenemos ahora, y específicamente o de Europa, o de España, o de la recesión económica en Europa, o el estancamiento económico en Estados Unidos, o la desaceleración en China y en otros países, ¿qué exactamente podemos hacer de aquí al martes los líderes del G20 para dar una buena señal de que estamos tomando las decisiones que la sociedad espera que tomen sus líderes? Pragmáticamente, en este mundo terriblemente real que nos toca enfrentar, ¿qué podría ser una buena decisión que aparezca en nuestra decisión del próximo martes? ¿Alguien tiene una idea? Se reciben consejos. Adelante, profesor Yunus.
Yeah. One thing I guess can be said that the basic institutional framework and the policy framework that we have been working with, is not delivering things that we would like to be delivered. So have to look back. If we're just trying to push this thing more and more, it doesn't produce the solutions. So we have to be bold. In G20, we have to be bold to say that we want innovative ideas, innovative institutional framework, innovative policy framework, so that it's not the same thing over and over again. Probably maybe this system that we have is coming to its ability to provide the solutions. No matter how much struggle we make with that, it will not produce the solution that we are looking for. Because this is 21st century. And in this 21st century, things will, even if it goes in the wrong way, go in the wrong way in a very quick way. So before we come to a disaster, can we look back with all the tools that we have, all the framework that we have, are we in the right framework? I think that's a basic question we have to ask ourselves, although we don't know what that solution is. But we have to raise this question and invite all the innovative ideas, innovative, creative ideas and so on, so that we can pick up the things which can create the future structure. I think that's the most important thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Yunus. Professor Cooper. No?
Yes. I just saw a study this week by a colleague of 15 countries, all in the G20, who have reformed their financial regulation. And the one characteristic that's consistently true is that power has been moved from relatively independent decision makers to political decision makers. So in the United States, for example, the Secretary of the Treasury acquires substantially more power over the intervention in individual banks that get in trouble. And this is systematic, as I say, in the 15 countries studied. And I myself am very skeptical that that's the right way to go.
Yes, I'd like to make a couple of comments. I think the Mexico G20 is held at a very critical moment because of the Greek problem, the Spain problem. People are looking for the G20 to give a direction that will give them confidence. Business have money, but they don't invest. People have money, they don't buy, and they don't want to spend because people are confused. People don't have confidence. So, I mean, there's no lack of money. People just they don't see the future. They did not see the direction clear. So whether or not this G20 meeting, coming out of it in the next few days, can give people the level of confidence that is so. I don't think, the G20 can solve the Greek problem, the Spain problem, but you need, as leaders of the world, holding 90% of the GDP, accounting for 2/3 of the populations. We are waiting for you for good signals.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Any comment? Bueno,
creo que el gran tema es construir confianza, como muy bien decía Margaret Chan, y creo que una acción conjunta inmediata de los principales bancos centrales del mundo esta semana que viene empieza a bajar los niveles de incertidumbre. Ahora que estamos en la Eurocopa, tengo que recordarle, presidente, hace 4 años la Eurocopa la ganó Grecia, hace 2 la ganó España, quién sabe qué gane esta, pero en fin.
Muy bien, gracias, doctor. Hacer un soporte económico importante, ¿no? Y recordar, por supuesto, que el dinero no da la felicidad, y menos cuando es poquito, ¿no? Muy bien, pues muchas gracias a todos. Thank you all of you for this quite interesting panel. Thank you.
Es así como damos por finalizado este evento. Se despide de ustedes el ciudadano presidente de los Estados Unidos mexicanos, agradeciendo su amable asistencia. Tengan todos una excelente tarde.